Good morning, brothers and sisters. You know the drill by now. My name is Matthew Gill. I am the prophet and the first elder of the restored branch of Jesus Christ. Welcome to my second Joseph Smith video. As you might remember, last time we spoke about the first vision and some of the complications surrounding the first vision that some people might get into. But today we're going to move the story along slightly, and we're going to talk about Joseph Smith and the translation of the plates and the plates themselves. I have a plethora of questions. I've got some notes so I don't say anything somebody's going to pick up on or make comment about. But today, as I say, we're going to be talking about the plates, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 questions that I'm going to try and get through today. Talk to you about the plates. Some of these questions will be answered as we're going through. So anyway, I hope you're all keeping well. I hope you're happy. I hope that life is treating you kindly. If not, I pray and ask the Lord to send His Spirit to be with you and to strengthen you and uphold you. Okay, so without further ado, let's crack on. So my first question is from a guy called Peter. He asks, how old was Joseph when he first went to receive the plates? Okay, according to my data, Joseph was 17 when he first went to the hill Cumorah to retrieve the plates. And of course, we know the narrative that Joseph went to the hill, prized the stone away, saw the plates, and I think his worldly aspirations took over slightly. However, he didn't take the plates, but he saw the plates at 17 in the hill, at the place where Moroni had said they were. Now we have to remember that Moroni had come to him before this time, and Moroni told him about the plates, and on that occasion, he visited him 4 times, repeated the information he told to him that night, and added additional information every time he came as well. So it wasn't like Joseph just stumbled upon the hill and found the plates. He knew where they were. Moroni had told him where they were. What the plates basically contained was a history of the people that once inhabited this land. And we won't get into too much of the Heartland theory. However, I and the restored branch of Jesus Christ's thoughts on this are that when Moroni or the Book of Mormon say this land, it is talking about North America, in particular the heartland of North America and the eastern coast of North America. Everything I'm going to tell you today is basically what the restored branch of Jesus Christ believe and teach. Now, some of these things might be different from some of the things you learn about your organisation within the Restoration, but this is what the restored branch of Jesus Christ believes. So, to answer Peter's question, Joseph was 17 when he first went to the hill to retrieve the plates, and of course we know he didn't do that. However, from 1823 to 1827, Joseph went to the hill Cumorah every year, and during these visits to the hill, he would receive instruction, prophecy, covenants, information about what was on the plates. I certainly believe that by the time he did retrieve the plates and began working on the plates in 1827, I think he had a rough idea of what would be on the plates. I mean, I don't think he knew things like the names of places or characters, but I think he certainly had a rough idea. I think he had more than a rough idea of what the story was basically going to outline before he took hold of the plates because of these visits. We also know that other heavenly ministers helped prepare Joseph for the receiving of the plates. So, why was Joseph forbidden from taking the plates? Well, we've just covered that, Wendy. Thank you for the question. Um, I think he looked at the gold on the plates and thought, "Oh boy, that's a lot of gold. I'm a poor." Well, we keep saying this about Joseph, don't we? And I've got to be careful I don't fall into the LDS trap here by saying Joseph Smith was a poor itinerant farm boy. Certainly wasn't itinerant, um, um, and he certainly wasn't poor from the extent of a farming background. The guy knew how to farm. His family knew how to farm. They might not have been extremely successful at it, but they made a living out of doing it, enough to keep on doing it. They certainly wasn't itinerant. Um, I mean, they were sapping maple in maple trees and selling them. That's expensive stuff back in the day. This is before glass bottles. We went down to the supermarket. Um, so there is pervading narrative throughout the whole Joseph Smith story that he was ill-educated, ill-prepared. Um, he came from a really poor, dirt poor family. That I'm not too sure. I believe that. Everything I've read about Joseph, um, we know that he could read and write. Um, Emma Smith describes his hand, his writing hand. Now, what we have to remember is we keep comparing things to today, and in today's society, unless you are deliberately living out of society's reach, unless you are deliberately not going to school, most people know how to read and write, unless you're living on the edges of society. It is a little different back in the day, and we have to keep in mind also that Joseph's father taught in school. You couldn't do that unless you could read or write. You had to pass that knowledge on. So, and Hiram being educated the way he was, also, I mean, they were far from poor itinerant people. But that's beside the point. I think he looked at the plates like anybody would back in the day and thought, that's a heck of a lot of. Well, I've got to be careful. I also don't make a mistake here and say it was gold, because we don't know it was gold. But it looked like gold. It had the appearance of gold, and he thought, that's a lot of money. And I don't think his heart was centered on the right desires for the plates. So that's why he was forbidden from taking them. There isn't a lot of narrative about that. A lot of the stories written about that are after the fact by other people. I know Joseph very rarely touches on it in his diaries and when he's talking to people. And we have to remember a lot of Joseph's diaries are written by other people, not just himself. So we know very little about that, other than what we've been told in written accounts by people. So we need to be careful we don't imprint too much onto that situation. I don't know what was going through Joseph's mind. You don't know what was going through Joseph's mind. But the angel knew what was going through Joseph's mind and forbade him from taking the plates, which is all we really need to know. So as I say, he doesn't take the plates, and he goes back between 1823 and 1827. Which is about 4 years, and then he receives instruction from Moroni and other people. And then finally, he gets to take the plates. Now, I haven't got a question here about this, but I know it is spoken of a lot. What was in the box? And there's a lot of artist renditions of it with all kinds of stuff in the box. I'll tell you what was in the box, what we believe was in the box. The plates, and I'm not going to call them gold because we don't know, but the plates, the Urim, Thummim, and the breastplate, these are the only recordable items that Joseph said were in the box. The thing about the sword of Laban and the Leahona being in there isn't, I believe, factual. They were shown those things at a later date. Excuse me. They were shown those things at a later date during the three witness testimony event when they saw the angel. But I don't believe that the plates. I don't believe that the sword of Laban. Well, definitely not the sword of Laban. It had been too big to go in the box. And the Liahona were there. I think everything was there that Joseph needed to translate the plates. He didn't need the Liahona to translate the plates. Certainly didn't need the sword of Laban to translate. But he did need the breastplate and the Urim and Thummim and the plates themselves. So those are the objects that we teach were in the box. Now, obviously, if someone can prove to me and show me that other items were in the box, I mean, there's some people out there that believe there was nothing in the box, but we're going with the narrative that Joseph was telling the truth. So the plates, the breastplate, and the Urim and Thummim. Now, this has to be understood. The Urim and Thummim is explained in detail of what it was. It was an old type of spectacle with 2 stones in each, and he would connect that to the breastplate whilst he was translating. That's why they were there, so that Joseph could get the work done. Okay, so next question. What do we know? This is from Jason. What do we know about the translation process of the plates? Well, we know a fair amount. We know that Joseph first began translating in 1827, when he was 21. We know that the majority of the Book of Mormon, which is 531 pages, was translated with Oliver Cowdery as scribe in about 65 working days. So that would be probably from April to June of 1829. However, that's not accounting for the time he spent excuse me, with Martin Harris. And then, of course, we talk about the narrative of the lost 116 pages, which is asked by June here, why are the lost 116 pages called the lost 116 pages, and why are they lost? Can someone, Ali asks again, it's another question that ties into it, can someone tell me what was on the lost pages? Shirley asks the same thing, do we know what was on the lost pages? Okay, well, there's a great book that I have. I'll just grab it. Now, before I give this a plug, and it is going to be a plug because people are going to see the video and go, oh, I want to get the book. This is called The Lost 116 Pages by Don Bradley, Reconstructing the Book of Mormon's Missing Stories. He goes into what was on the lost pages, how did Mormon's abridgment of the period differ from the accounts of Nephi's small plates, where did the brass plates and Laban's sword come from, how did Lehi's family and the descendants live the law of Moses without the temple, and all kinds of stuff. Don Bradley is an author and independent historian specialising in the beginnings of the Latter-day Saint restoration. Firstly, let me just say, it's a great book. It's a really good book. There are some things in it that I don't agree with. I certainly don't agree with the Masonic narrative that is prevalent throughout most of the book. But he describes some of the instances of the lost 116 pages really well, like why they were lost in the first place, who might have took them, do we really have to blame Lucy Harris as often as we do? Did she burn them? I doubt it. What was on the last 116 pages? Were there 116 pages? The answer to these questions is no, there were more than 116 pages. What was on them? I would imagine the first 116 pages of the Book of Mormon were a more embellished, rich secular history. And that goes right up until Mosiah. So it's a fair chunk of the book that went missing. That Joseph had to go back and get the small plates and use the small plates to plug the gap, left from the lost pages. Martin Harris could be blamed, could be culpable. I mean, Joseph, for me, is the one we really should be leaning very heavily on. Excuse me. He was told twice by God, no, don't let these pages out of your sight. He asked the third time, and God said to him, all right, well, if that's what you want to do, go for it. And the result was that Martin Harris lost them. Now, whatever happened to them, they're lost. I mean, are they destroyed? I don't know. Probably after all this time, maybe. I mean, I can't imagine a situation where they're still stuck in someone's bureau somewhere, or in a box, in a locked chest somewhere, or after all this time, they're probably destroyed. I mean, I don't know, is the answer to the question. We know that there's a lot of things on the lost pages that is alluded to in the Book of Mormon that we don't have a narrative for. We know that Joseph and Martin Harris spent a lot of time on this. So it is no matter what people say, it is a loss, because much of the Book of Mormon is written in the mindset that you have that. It's written in a way that would indicate that the person abridging and doing the text believes you have this, you are reading it. However, we need to remember that the small plates were included because God told Moroni to include them, and he didn't know why. That might have given him an indication that something might happen, but I don't think Moroni definitely knew that there was going to be a lost section of the work he'd done. I certainly don't believe that. However, it did get lost, and we don't know what was on those lost 116 pages. Don goes into great detail about what might have been on them because of conversations that Joseph Smith Sr. had with people who come to interview him about the Book of Mormon, and he talks about certain events and things that aren't in the Book of Mormon narrative that we have today, such as burial rituals and ceremonial things, Law of Moses institutions and ordinances. So, I mean, from my point of view, it is a loss, and we need to treat it as a loss. Well, I think it's dangerous for us to keep on thinking, oh well, it doesn't matter because we had the small plates of Nephi in the end, and the small plates of Nephi filled the gap. Well, that's the problem. They filled the gap. I think a lot was lost on those pages that we could probably benefit from today. Because the Book of Mormon picks up from Mosiah as if you have those things. It picks up the narrative as and it's alluded to in books like Omni, for instance. So it is sad that we lost them. We can't. No one can tell you what was actually on those plates. Don Bradley does a good job of surmising what was probably on those plates, and his book is very good. However, it's from an LDS perspective, from an LDS historian. Although he calls himself independent, he is LDS, and it is from an LDS slanted view because he needs to tie in LDS temple ritual into this. So I've encouraged people to read it. Just take from the book the bits you need to take from the book and ignore the bits that don't apply to you, which is what we do with books anyway in historical documents. So what else we got? What else? Okay, so yes, Joseph did when he lost the pages, the Urim and Thummim was removed from him for a season. I had, and I don't have it to hand, and I'll try and find it and give it to you next time I do part 3. Joseph recites a story that he tells his mom about receiving back the Urim and Thummim after the lost 116 pages, after a small season has passed. What else we got? Let's see. Who were the scribes that did the most work? Okay, well, who did the most work would be Oliver did the most work, but then it would be Martin Harris, because as we don't know how many pages were lost. This 116 narrative is something that came into being long after Nauvoo. But anyway, Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and then he did have other scribes. Emma, which a lot of people don't know, Emma scribed for him for a while, which would have been interesting. So did John Whitmer when they were in the Whitmer house, where eventually the translation was finished. The Whitmer farm. And there are indications that other people did help during that translation process. I certainly don't believe it's just those four people: Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, John Whitmer, and Emma Smith. I really do believe other people lent a hand in getting that done. There is a lot of evidence that there were other people that worked on the plates, but we don't exactly know who. But there is anecdotal evidence that the people did. We know we've answered Aidan's. How long did the translation last for? Or like the majority of it, which is what Oliver Cowdery did with Joseph, was 531 pages from April to June 1829. So plus you tag on the lost work, a couple of months. It took a while. I mean, everyone cracks on about how quick it took. Well, we have to remember there were huge gaps in the translation. Weeks and weeks went by without doing anything. I mean, weeks went by before he even was able to resume work after he lost 116 pages. And it wasn't a continuous stream of translations. The other thing people don't understand. They see these wonderful pictures depicted of Joseph Smith by candlelight, translating the plates, as if it was like one big moment. And it wasn't. It happened in lots of various different places. It happened over various different times with varying different peoples. But the one constant, however, is wherever Joseph left off, he knew where to pick up from, which is indicative of the fact that he is not making it up. Too many people credit Joseph with having like this really great memory that he could pick up narratives when he left them off like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks ago. I certainly don't believe in the Dan Vogel theory that it's all from Joseph's mind. It's far too complex and it's far too spiritual in nature, and I don't subscribe to that. We don't subscribe to that theory anyway. I mean, Dan Vogel's books are very interesting. The hypothesis behind lots of things is extremely interesting. If you have a chance to read them, I would encourage you to read them. I think it's important to read everything written about the prophet and about the early church and about his background, because it's only when you have both sides of an informed argument that you can make a decision about what it is you believe in. You have to have a firm testimony going into reading things, I believe, and if you are fragile in your testimony, I would encourage you not to. I would encourage you to go seek counsel with your Father in heaven first, and but if you are pretty secure in what you believe in, I don't think there's any harm in reading other books. Knowledge, as they say, is the purveyor of all goodness. So, what else? Well, I've been over this. We know the pages were lost. Joseph Smith receives a revelation telling him that the pages might have been altered, so he needs to go back and use the small plates of Nephi, which is what he does do. And again, but I've already been over. The last 116 pages held the secular history of the Nephites. But we still have a Nephite record because we have the small plates. One of the questions. When did the translation finish, and where was Joseph living at the time? That's by Lucy. Okay, so they'd moved into the Whitmer farm, and they used the upper room of the Whitmer farm house, which, as far as I understand it, was vacant anyway. And that's when I believe John Whitmer stepped in to help translate. And it was finished and completed at the Whitmer farm. And there were people coming and going throughout that period. Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris had, make an appearance every now and again. Obviously, Emma was living there as well. It's interesting to note that Emma and Joseph didn't have their own home at this point, that they were living with the Whitmer family. Now, there was probably great wisdom in that because of the three witness narrative that happened near the Whitmer home. So maybe it was Paul being set up for exactly that. What I think is how you pronounce his name, Johannesson. I hope I pronounced your name properly. Johannesson asks, what do you think the translation said to Joseph? Or in other words, what did he learn? Oh, blimey. Well, he learnt loads throughout the translation process. I think one of the biggest things he learnt throughout the translation process is authority and baptism. Why baptism is so important and how it is linked and is a part of the doctrine of Christ. And I think he learnt what the doctrine of Christ really was. And I think he learnt that whilst they were translating 3rd Nephi. Because I know they stopped during the translation of 3rd Nephi to ask why is baptism, why is authority, and why is baptism necessary. And Jesus is very specific in 3rd Nephi as to why baptism is very necessary. Because it is the doctrine of Christ that we believe, and we are baptized, we have our sins forgiven, and that we make a covenant with God to follow him, and only through baptism can we return to live with our Father in heaven. So I think from the translation that's probably the biggest thing he learned, that baptism was necessary for us to return to our Father, to whose presence. I think it was like a bolt out of the blue, because obviously Joseph knew about baptism before he translated the record, because most of his family had been baptized Methodists or into other faiths. His father wasn't a regular churchgoer; he was a Universalist, so he didn't go to church. He knew of baptism, knew of the construct of religion, but I think from translating the plates and the method in the way it was translated helped him understand what the doctrine of Christ was, why baptism was important, why it was necessary. But also in a larger sense, it helped him understand this new religion, this new way of thinking about Christ, this new way of thinking about God, this new way, this lost civilization that once lived here on the lands I'm now living on. What were they about? What did they believe? What didn't they believe? I think it was a major education for Joseph Smith, not in as much as it taught him how to read and write. I think it was a religious education that helped him to become the man he became. Through the Kirtland era, through the Zion's March, Zion's Camp era, and through the trials of Liberty Jail and Missouri. I think without the grounding he had in the translation process, it would have been easier for him to have walked away, I believe. But I think when he translated this and he knew what it was and he knew the pains that had gone to preserving it, bringing it about, and the way in which he translated the plates, the using of the Urim and Thummim, the using of the breastplate, helped him understand that this was an important record, that it needed to be translated and gotten out to the world. Now, I'll have a question here from Duncan. Yes. Duncan S. Williams. Hello, Duncan. Hope you're well. Duncan Williams asks, what other methods were used to translate the plates other than the Urim and Thummim? Do we know concrete whether Joseph used a peep stone and a hat? Right. No. We don't. No. Concrete. There are anecdotal writings that say Joseph Smith did use CF stone or a peep stone, whatever you want to call it, sometime during the translation process. There are other people that say sometimes the plates weren't even in the room when he translated. Can I just say something? It doesn't really matter. I mean, the restorationists, Mormons, whatever you want to call them, would say it matters greatly because, how could he have translated without the plates being in the room? Why did he need to use a special stone he found in the bottom of a well? All that kind of garbage. It doesn't matter. To me, anyway. I mean, I know a lot of people put a lot of store into why it matters. For me, it doesn't matter. And I'm coming from a different perspective than most people. This isn't about me or the work that we've done. It's about Joseph. But I've translated a record. I bought one about. And my experience in translating was extremely profound. It was hard, grueling. I often say to people, unless you've been through the process, it's very hard for people to understand exactly what's going on. I mean, there are people who subscribe to the fact that Joseph basically uttered every word that's on the page. I don't know if I agree with that necessarily. I think there are ways in which the Lord gets us to see things during the translation process. I know as we were translating the book of Urine, when there were things that I needed to see, I saw scenes play out, conversations play out between people, and I'd record that. It certainly was not a word for word blanket like you're translating from an ancient document word for word. And I certainly don't think that's what Joseph did either, because there wouldn't be word for word repetitions like that. This record was written in Reformed Egyptian, and there probably wouldn't have been an English equivalent word. So Joseph had to find the nearest thing to it. The Lord had to find the nearest thing to it. So I don't prescribe to the LDS narrative that it was done word for word. I just take it for what it is. It's a translated document. It's extremely important to who we are as people today. It's extremely relevant to who we are today. Without the Book of Mormon, we're nobody, and it is the keystone to the restoration, without a doubt. I've never ever made the claim that the Book of Jeraneck is anywhere near as important or relevant to the restoration movement, because it's not meant to be. The Book of Jeraneck is an additional testimony of a group of people that lived under the rules of the gospel of Jesus Christ and who had a relationship with Jesus Christ. There is nothing in there that would lend itself to being deeply, significantly important to the restoration. I think it's deeply and importantly significant to know that living in Great Britain thousands of years ago, during the time of the Jaredites, there were people here who believed in God, who had a relationship with God, who built marvellous temples and places of worship, and who had ordinances and who had rites of passage that we don't know about today. I think that's really important. And I think Joseph was aware that there were other records pertaining to other places in the world, because he wrote about it in the Doctrine and Covenants. So I believe it's important we have these records made manifest to us. I certainly don't think it's necessary for us to have a complete understanding of the Book of Mormon and a complete perfect relationship with the Book of Mormon to have those things given to us. However, I believe a complete and perfect relationship and understanding of the Book of Mormon is important for the restoration to go forward in the strength it needs to go forward. And of course, many of the organizations within the restoration are still living under the same condemnation that the early church was living in when it was proclaimed in the Doctrine and Covenants that the church had treated the Book of Mormon lightly. I still believe that organizationally many of us need to repent and come out from that, under that condemnation, because the Book of Mormon is the driving force behind the restoration, whereas the Book of Jeranik isn't that. And I believe you could have a record, say, coming out of, I don't know, Central Russia, that also talks about people's relationship with God, their dealings, their ceremonies, their whatever you might want to call it. But it doesn't have a driving influence behind the restoration. These things just add to the narrative. They add to the narrative that God has a relationship with his children, and that Christ, his Son, who is the Saviour of all man, also has a relationship with those civilizations, and that relationship is key and important to them as it is to us. I believe that the Book of Mormon that we have, because of the translation of the plates, is vital to the restoration. We know that after Joseph had finished translating, that the records were given back to Moroni along with the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate. We know Joseph kept a seer stone and he used it throughout the rest of his life. And we know that in 1830 the document that contained the translation was printed by the Grand Impress into what we now know as the Book of Mormon. So, I hope that's been helpful. I hope that I've answered the questions in a pleasing manner. I want to thank Peter, Wendy, Jason, Aidan, Sonny, June, Ellie, Shirley, Lucy, Johannesson. If I missed anyone off there, I apologise. For your questions, keep them coming. In the next segment, we're going to move slightly away from Joseph's early time, and we're going to move to Kirtland, and we're going to talk about the creeping menace and shadow of polygamy. I want to touch on that. And then in my final part 4 video, we're going to touch on the Nauvoo and martyrdom. So my part 3 video, which I'm hopefully going to deliver about a week, 2 weeks time, because I know Elder Gill's doing a lesson next week, will be on Joseph's time in Kirtland. We're going to cover the collapse of the anti-banking thing. We're going to cover the building of the temple, which by the way is significant, and we're also going to discuss the creeping menace and shadow of polygamy, and why we believe in the restored branch of Jesus Christ, that Joseph never was a polygamist, and that many in the early church were not polygamists. So, until next time, my friends, take care, look after one another. I know these are very trying times we're living in. The world seems to have lost its mind right now. But just remember, your Father in heaven loves you. His Son Jesus Christ is your Saviour, and they want you to live the best life you can, and hopefully follow the doctrine of Christ and return to live with your Father in heaven. So until we meet again, brothers and sisters, God bless, look after one another, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.